How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Zayin, Daf 7 of Masechta Makos. Friends, we are going to finish the first page of the first parak of Masechta Makos. We're already a quarter of the way through the Masechta. This Masechta flies. I'm telling you, by the time Masechta Makos starts in real life, I'm already going to be like halfway through the Masechta. By the time of course I'm ahead. I think by the time Daf Yomi officially starts Makos, I'll be halfway through the Masechta. I think it's a quick one. All right, here we go. Yes, we're going to finish the first parak of Masechta Makos that talks about Edom Zolman, and we're going to start the second parak of Masechta Makos that talks about Ari Miklat, cities of refuge. All right, so we're going to start at the Mishnah on Daf Zayin Omid Aleph, the last Mishnah of the first parak. Mishnigmar Dinoy Uvarach. Okay, so if you have a guy who was convicted of murder and he runs away, I wonder why. Bezdin, and he comes back to that Bezdin. I also wonder why. In Sosun as Dino, they do not give him a retrial. They don't say, you came back, all right, we'll give you a retrial. No, you push it, dead meat. That in any scenario where two witnesses show up in a court and they say, hey, Courty, we were witnesses in the trial that Geva murdered Itamar. And we were witnesses in this trial. The trial occurred in Bezdin Shel Ploni, and so-and-so's Bezdin, Ufloni, Edav, and so-and-so were the witnesses, or I guess two witnesses come and testify that Geva was convicted in the murder of Itamar, and so-and-so were his witnesses. Well, that is, we will kill him based on that testimony. All right. Sounds like a good deal. Sanhedrin neheges ba'aretz u'v'chutzlaretz. Sanhedrin works in both Eretz Yisrael and Chutzlaretz. This is a little bit of a tricky statement because we of course learned in Masechta Sanhedrin that Sanhedrin of course needs to be composed of mumchin, and mumchin are people with smicha, and smicha is only in Eretz Yisrael. But anyways, the point is that mumchin from Eretz Yisrael can judge in Chutzlaretz. Sanhedrin, so this is a famous line over here. I feel like everybody knows this line from this Mishnah in Masechta Makos. Sanhedrin ha'yireges echad b'shavua nikreis chovlonis. A Sanhedrin that puts somebody to death even once every 7 years. One example every 7 years. That would be considered a particularly aggressive Bezdin. I think in Iran they execute more than 365 people a year, which means that they execute on average more than one person a day. That's a lot of dead people. It's a lot of executions. So the Tanakama says over here that in our tradition, yes, there's capital punishment. However, it was meted out very rarely. Belaz ben Azariah Omer says Belaz ben Azariah echad l'shivim shana, once every 70 years. The Gemara is going to ask exactly what this means, once every 70 years, but Belaz ben Azariah says once every 70 years. Reb Tarfon and Reb Akiva Omrim say Reb Tarfon and Reb Akiva ilu ayinu b'Sanhedrin, if we were in the Sanhedrin. Now they lived right. I guess they must have lived mamish right after the Churban Abayis. But even so, even before the Churban Abayis, though, what was it? How many years before the Churban Abayis did it say that the Sanhedrin left and they went to the Chanus? Was it 100 years? Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. At some tkufa before, so already there wasn't Dinei Nefashos for a while. But Rabbi Akiva, his teachers were Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara talks about Masech the Sukkah there, Rabbi Eliezer, how Rabbi Yoshua, he talks about his experience during the Simchas Beis HaShoeva. Anyways, so he must have been right after the destruction of the Churban Abayis, Churban Bayis Sheni. But anyways, says Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon that if they were in the Sanhedrin, Loi Nerag Adam Me'olam, nobody would have ever been killed. And the Gemara is going to talk about how they would, be so sure. Like, if Geva murders Itamar and there are witnesses and there's a warning, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean they wouldn't be killed? I mean, of course, the halach is that Geva will slice off his head. So, anyways, which Rav Shimon ben Gamliel do you think that is? I wonder. Do you think it is Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, the father of Rebbe? If he's the father of Rebbe, I imagine he's probably slightly younger than Rabbi Akiva. Could be Rebbe's father. Could also be Rebbe's great grandfather. Maybe it's Taka Rebbe's father. I don't know. Anyways, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Afen Marbin Shoifchei Dam b'Yisrael. That says Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon coming out publicly with a statement like that is very dangerous because if murderers know that they can get away with murder, because even if they murder, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva are going to do whatever they can to prevent the capital punishment. So there's no what's that called? There's no deterrence. There's no deterrent factor, right? At least knowing that there's a possibility of capital punishment serves as a deterrent. But if you know that basically the Sanhedrin is on your side and they'll do whatever they can to prevent your punishment, your capital punishment, so then you're basically encouraging in some ways murderers to murder. Coffee break. Zog the Gemara. Lifnei oisoi bezdin hu te ein soisrin, hod lifnei bezdin acher soisrin. Right, the Mishnah had opened up by saying, I'll read it, and I quote, Mishenigmar dino uvarach ubalifnei oisoi bezdin ein soisrin is dino. Right, so somebody, right, Geva murders Itamar, and then he runs away before they can slice off his head. Then he comes back to that bezdin. So we say there's no retrial. There's no retrial, implying, okay, if he came back to that bezdin, there's no retrial. If he went to a different bezdin, there would be a retrial. Again, lifnei oisoi bezdin hu de'ein sosrin. Yeah, if he goes back to that bezdin, there's no retrial. Ha lifnei bezdin acher. But if he would go to a different bezdin, sosrin, there would be a retrial. Hatani seifa, but it says right after that, kol mokim sheyamdu shnaim v'yoimru. In any scenario where two people will come to a different bezdin and they will say, midin anu es ish ploini, that we are testifying about Geva, she nigmar dino bebezdin ploni, that he was convicted in a particular bezdin, ufloni edav, and so and so were those who testified against Geva. Hareze nerag, Geva will be put to death, will slice off his head, and there is no retrial even in another bezdin. Amar Abaye says, the Rebbe Abaye, lekasha, it's no problem. Kan be'eretz Yisrael, kan bechutz loretz. Oh, depends if the other bezdin is in Israel, where I live, or in chutz loretz, where some other people of Babylon Talmud live. Titania is willing to buy so beautiful. Dostoi Omer Mishum Reb Shimon ben Shatach. Says Reb Yehuda ben Dostoi, the name of Reb Shimon ben Shatach. Shimon ben Shatach doesn't come up that much in the Gemara. He's one of the Zugis. I think he was probably the one right before Shmaya and Avtalion. I went to the mikveh of Shmaya and Avtalion recently. Akoponim. Yeah, so right, the Hillel and Shammai were the last of the Zugis. Before Hillel and Shammai were Shmaya and Avtalion, and before them, I believe, were Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shatach. Okay, I think before that was Rabbi Shua ben Prachi and Nita Arbeli, and before that was Yossi ben Yoezer Ish Tzred and Yossi ben Yoezer Ish Yerushalayim, I think. That was a long time ago. That was, I guess, probably the second temple, right? Yeah, that must have been the second temple. I mean, Hillel and Shammai and Shemayin of Time were certainly the second temple, and I guess then all the Zugas were probably the second temple. Akoponim. So where are we? So Baruch me'aretz l'chutz la'aretz. So if Geva runs away from Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz, ein sosun es dino. So then we do not do a retrial. However, mechutz la'aretz, from chutz la'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, sosun es dino, we would afford Geva a retrial because of the zchus, because of the merit of Eretz Yisrael. As Rashi says, Ulai toyel limtzoy le pesach shel zchis. Right? Maybe the merit of Eretz Yisrael will work to bring merit to Geva's fate. Sanhedrin noeges v'chulei. Sanhedrin operates in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutzos. How do we know this? The Tanur Rabbanan, the Rabbi said, "V'hoyu ele lachem l'chukas mishpal d'oraseichem," and it continues b'chol mosh v'oseichem. So be'etzem Sanhedrin is wherever you are. Eretz Yisrael, Chutz La'aretz. Lomadnu the Sanhedrin shenoeges ba'aretz u'v'chutz la'aretz. So we learn that Sanhedrin is noeges in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz. Imkein matam lomar b'sharecho. So why does the pasuk say shoftim v'shoitrim titin l'cha b'sharecho, in your gates in Eretz Yisrael? B'sharecha atam Moshe b'titin b'chol pelach v'felach u'v'chol ir v'ir. In Eretz Yisrael, it's in every province and in every city. Whereas in Chutz La'aretz there are Sanhedrins in every province, but not necessarily in every city. Now, the Mishnah had said that a Sanhedrin that executes capital punishment once every 7 years is called a very aggressive Bezdin. And then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah had said every 70 years. What about every 70 years? Every 70 years would be aggressive. Kilu. Tanakama says once every 7 years is aggressive. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says even if it's 10 times less frequent, even if it's once every 70 years, it would still be considered aggressive. Is that what it's saying? Or maybe it's saying no, every 70 years is what would be considered normal. In fact, the Gemara excuse me. Iboyalu, they ask a kasha. Achas l'shivim shana nikres chavlonis. Is it chavlonis? Are we saying that every 70 years would be aggressive? Or duma orech arahi? Or maybe we're saying that every 70 years is normal. Teku, ich weiß nicht. Oh, excuse me, 1 second. All right, I'm back. I'm tired of Rabbi Akiva Omrim. Says Rabbi Tarfon Rabbi Akiva, if we were there, nobody would ever get killed with capital punishment. So what did they? I don't understand. How would they ensure that? Right? 2 witnesses come and say, we saw Geva murder Itamar, and they give all the information that is required of them. Okay, the Torah says, right? Was it? Shoki shofech dama adam, ba'adam dama yishofech. Right? That the Torah says you murder somebody, we slice off your head. I don't understand what's Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon saying we wouldn't do it. Well, you refuse to do it with the Rabbanu Shalom wants of us. So what would they do? If there's witnesses and warning and everything, the halacha is that we have to slice off Geva's head. So Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar, Damitarvayu, well, they would just get into very specific kinds of questions. Risim treifa oreg shalom oreg. Hey, witnesses. Now, was Geva? How do you know Geva wasn't a treifa? If Geva was a treifa, I think we learned about this in Masechta Sanhedrin. I think, right, that if a treifa murders, so then he's potter. I think if he murders in front of a bezdin, so then we would slice off his head. But be'etzem, so they would get into very specific questions like, how do you know that Itamar? I think I said. What? No, treifa harag. Sorry, if Itamar was a treifa, right? So maybe Itamar was a treifa, so therefore Geva would be potter for killing a treifa. Right? He killed somebody who's already dead. So how do you know that Itamar wasn't a treifa? How do you know that he was healthy? And Omer Avashi, Im Timtzulomar Shalim Hava, and if you're going to say, well, we checked. We did a what's the thing called when you after the person dies and you try to figure out what happened? What's that thing called, Dennis? What's that thing called after somebody dies and then you like cut them open and check a few things? They do that thing after the person dies. A post-death opening up checking thingy, and that thing that I should probably know what it's called, that thingy. So if they said, well, we checked everything. We checked all the different signs that would indicate of a treifa, and he was a healthy kind of guy. So shalom hava, but then b'makom saif nekev hava. But maybe Geva sliced off Itamar's head. Maybe he sliced the neck. Maybe in the place where he sliced, there was already a hole there, and Itamar was actually in fact a treifa. So so what are you going to say about that? So therefore, maybe Geva's potter because maybe Itamar was a treifa. Autopsy. I think the word I was thinking of was autopsy. But okay, what about a scenario of what if it wasn't a murder case? What if it was a scenario of like Eishes Ish, for example? How would they wiggle themselves out of capital punishment there? So well, the assumption is that the witnesses simply saw that there was some guy was having bia with a married woman, and they didn't get into the details to like mamash see the penetration. That's the assumption. They saw, okay, they know what they saw. But Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Tarfon would mamash say, no, you didn't see the penetration itself. Possible. For Abon Nechi Dainu. Well, if that's the case, then the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Tarfon, how would they put this fellow to death? Because we make a point, right? You're not seeing the penetration. So Kishmuel Damar Shmuel b'menaifim mishayir k'menaifim. The Shmuel says, look, when it comes to bia, it's enough to just say, hey, we know what we saw. It was without seeing the actual penetration, they were able to tell what was going on. That is enough. Hadron Olach Ketzad Ho'edim. L'chaim. Mamash l'chaim. To life, to not having not being capitally punished. Capitally punished. Now to begin the second perek of Masechta Makos, that talks about cities of refuge. Elu and Agoylin, the following people are go to a city of refuge, are exiled to a city of refuge. Of course, the halacha is that if Geva inadvertently murders Itamar, and we're going to learn about what considers inadvertence, what is considered inadvertence, but if you qualify, if an inadvertent murderer qualifies, they are exiled to a city of refuge where they remain and they are protected because there is a fellow called a Goyel Hadam. A Goyel Hadam is a relative of the victim. So the relative of the victim is allowed to kill the murderer. Okay? But if the murderer runs to a city of refuge, he is protected from the redeemer of the blood, from the Goel Hadam. And the murderer remains in the city of refuge until the current high priest dies. And then he is released, and the murderer can go on living his life outside of the city of refuge. Okay. So Elu and Agoylin, these are the people who are exiled. Ahoreg nefesh bishgoge, somebody who murders inadvertently. As we're going to see, that basically the principle is that if Geva murders Itamar inadvertently, and it was in a downward motion, as we're going to see, so then Geva must run to the city of refuge. If it was in an upward motion, he does not run to the city of refuge, and I think the point is that the Goel Adam would be prevented from taking revenge, from avenging the death of the victim. The Goel Adam cannot kill Geva if it was an upward motion. He would be potter for that. So, for example, a Maigel b'Magela. So this is like, what was the name of this Maigela? A Maigela is like this tool that like workers use, like people who are dealing with like wall kind of things. I've seen it before. You've probably all seen it before. I just know I don't remember what the word for. Oh, I have the article right here. Okay, what's the word for this thing? I imagine that a lot of people won't even know what this word means, and I didn't know what this word meant. I had to look it up, and I was like, oh, that's what you call that thing? It's called a roller. A roller. A roller? I feel like I didn't look up the word roller. I don't know. Maybe I did look up the word roller. A roller? Is it called a roller? I guess the roller. Okay. A roller. Anyways, it's like this thing that like, it's this thing I've seen it before. Like, okay, so their roofs, they were like flat roofs, but then they would like angle the top, I guess with like plaster, just so that the like water would like go run down and not just collect on the top. So what you would do is you would have this like thing that to smooth out the plaster or whatever. So I guess the point is you're like on the roof and you're like going in a downward motion with this roller thingy to smooth out the plaster. If when you're going in a downward motion, the roller falls out of your hand and falls down from the roof, lands on somebody's head, splits his head open and like breaks his brain, and the guy just like plops and history. So then the person on the roof would, as quickly as he can, run to the city of refuge. If, however, after going downwardly, he went upwardly, because I guess you're going in a down, up kind of motion. If he was going upwardly and it slipped out of his hand, and the same thing happened, fell off the roof, landed on some guy's head, split it open, blood all over the place, brains and everything, and the guy plops and he's like, ugh. So then the guy on the roof is potter. He doesn't go to the city of refuge. So again, Elu and Agolin, these are the people who are exiled. Hahorig nefesh bishgoge, somebody who inadvertently kills. Maigel b'Magela, if he was downwarding with the roller, v'nafla olav, and the roller falls down and splits open somebody's head, v'aragatu, and kills him. Or if he was pulling up a barrel, and maybe you have to get a barrel into like a second story of a house, and he's pulling it up on a rope. No, mishalshal, fakert. If he was like lowering a barrel from like a second story, and he's lowering it, and the rope splits, v'nafla olav, or it just somehow maybe gets loose and just kind of like falls on a guy and squishes him, and he's gestorben, v'aragatu, and the guy dies and goes to Wawud. Haya yorid basulam, or if somebody was descending a ladder, v'nafal, and he falls off of the ladder, v'nafal olav, and falls on the guy and breaks him and he dies. V'arago areze golet. So in all those examples, the killer, the inadvertent killer, runs as quickly as he can to the city of refuge. Avo, but imaya moishech b'Magela, if he was pulling upwards the roller, v'nafla olav, and then it slips and falls and splits open somebody's brains, v'aragatu, and it kills him. Oya dole b'chavis, or if he was pulling up a barrel to like a second story, let's say, v'nifsak achevel, and the rope breaks, v'nafla olav, and the barrel breaks on somebody and squishes him, v'aragatu, and kills him. Haya ola basulim, if he was going up a ladder, v'nafla olav, and then he falls down, v'arago, and kills a guy. Hareze eino golet. So in that case, he does not go to a city of refuge. I think the point is that he's potter, like he doesn't have to go and he's off the hook if it's upwards. Ze'akal, this is the rule. Kol sheb'derech yiridoso golet. If it's on its way down, if the action is a downward action, then the downwarder is exiled. So if it is not downwarding, then the non-downwarder, the person who's doing this activity that is not downward, does not go into exile. Now, this Gemara is going to get pretty technical. Just heads up. Okay, first of all, how do we know, what's the deal with this distinction between down versus up? The pasuk says, "Vayapel olav vayamos," and it falls on the victim and he dies. It falls in a falling kind of way, not in a rising kind of way. Right? The pasuk says, so the first pasuk we're going to read says, "Ve'krisem lachem arim." I'm reading the pasuk. "Arim mikla tiyenu lachem v'nasham retzech makin nefesh bishgage." It then continues, "Livnei Yisrael v'lager v'latosha b'soichem tiyena shalosh ha'arim ha'ele lemikla lanu shama kol makin nefesh bishgage." The next pasuk says, not the next pasuk, but the next pasuk in our Gemara says, "V'zed dvar rotzech asher yonus shama v'choy asher akes re'eu bivlidaas v'losoni lo mitmol shilsham." Okay, so says the Gemara, Tanar Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brayse, bishgage, when it says inadvertently, prat lemezid, to the exclusion of somebody who does it advertently, intentionally. He does not go to a city of refuge. The city of refuge will not be a refuge for him. The Golam can still kill him there. Bivlidas, without knowledge, prat lemiskavin, to the exclusion of somebody who intentionally kills. Mezid, so looking at the first part of the brayso, right? Bishgage prat lemezid. So mezid, why do we need to exclude a mezid, an intentional killer? Pshita, baktalu. Of course, an intentional killer cannot go to a city of refuge. He is chayev misa. Omarove ema prat leomer mutter. So says Rava, I'll say that when we're talking about a mezid, right, to exclusion of a mezid, it means to exclusion of omer mutter, to exclusion of somebody who says, "Oh, I didn't know. I thought you were allowed to kill people." So that person cannot go to a city of refuge. But Abaye says, wait, but if he says, "I didn't know," if he says, "I thought you were allowed to kill people," well, then he's onus. He didn't know. It's not his fault. He thought murder was permitted. So if that's the case, then what does that have to do with mezid, right? We're saying bishgaga prat lemezid, and we're saying, yeah, when we say intentional, we're talking about omer mutter. Omer mutter isn't intentional, it's onus. Amalei, so Rava responds, well, shani omer, that I say, omer mutter karav lemezidu. I will argue the opposite, that it's a ridiculous claim to say, "Oh, I thought you were allowed to kill people. I didn't know it was not allowed." That's ridiculous. That is so grossly irresponsible that it is borderline intentional. That's how ridiculous that is. And therefore, when we say mezid, yes, somebody who's deliberately intentional, of course, cannot go to a city of refuge. But not only that, even somebody who claims, "Oh, I thought you were allowed to murder," he also cannot go to a city of refuge, and he's got to watch out for the avenger of the blood. Bivlidas, the Bryce had continued and said, without knowledge, prat lemiskavin, to the exclusion of intentional. Miskavin, pshita, baktolu. Obviously, somebody who intentionally kills cannot go to a city of refuge. He's chayev misa if he killed intentionally. Amar Rabba, says Rabba, prat, what it's saying is to the exclusion of the miskavin lareg zabehema b'hareg adam. Somebody intended to kill an animal, but killed a person. The nachri b'hareg Yisrael lenefel b'hareg ben kayama. In these cases, he cannot go to a city of refuge. Now, the Mishnah in Sanhedrin had said that he is potter in that case, meaning he's not chayev misa, but he does not go to a city of refuge. I don't know. What about the can the avenger of the blood avenge the blood of the victim? I'm not sure. Yeah, what happens in that case? Let's see. Does the article say anything? Okay. In these cases, since the killing actually committed was inadvertent, could have been thought that he is insensitive. Okay. Now, does it say anything about the Goel Adam? Okay, this is okay. Does not mean okay. Because one time you can put in holds. Oh, okay. Anyways, fine. Okay. What happens to the Goal Adam in that case? If this guy doesn't go to the Nidachas, is it saying that he doesn't need to go there in Nidachas, or he's not allowed to go there in Nidachas? I don't know. Okay. Fine. Where are we? Maybe it means he's not allowed to, because it's not like an ones. Maybe it is an ones. I don't know. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, in befesa, if in close quarters, prat lekeren zavis, so exclusion of a corner. So if you're kind of going around the corner, and you got like a knife in front of you, and then you turn the corner, and boom, you stab somebody in the brain. So then I guess in that case, you would not need to go to I guess that would be considered ones. You would not need to go to a Ir Nidachas below Eva without hate. Prat Lesone, to the exclusion of a hater. A hater is not allowed to go to an Ir Hanidachas. Hadofo, Shedchofo Begufo, that he inadvertently pushed him with his body, or Yishtich Olav, or threw upon him, Lahavi Yerida Shitzarech Aliyah, to include in Ir Nidachas requirements, in exile requirements, going down in order to go up, right? Sometimes in order, if you're like swinging an axe, you got to go down a shtickle and then up a shtickle. So the going down in order to go up, you split open somebody's head. So then you would go to the Ir Nidachas there, because it's considered Yerida. Below Tzdiya, problem is skavin the tzadze v'holcholo the tzad acher. That in a situation where you intended, I guess, for like, I don't know, to like shoot an arrow in one direction, but it like backfired and shot in the other direction and like killed somebody, I guess you would not need to go to an Ir Nidachas. Okay, that excludes somebody who intended to throw 2, but he threw 4. Okay, he doesn't go to the Ir Hanidachas in that case. Okay. And somebody goes to his friend in a forest. Mayar, just like a forest is a place where both the damager and the damaged, right, the perpetrator and the victim, both are allowed to be there. It's a public space. So also, when we're talking about exile, we're talking about places where both the mazik and the nizak had permission to be there. Okay, as opposed to like, if you throw something over the fence to your own house and there happens to be somebody there and it falls on his head and kills him, so then you'd be potter for that, because what was the guy doing there? Okay. So this is an interesting question, because we had said that downward you are exiled for, upward you are not exiled for. But what if you're going up a ladder? So there's an upward aspect, but then a rung falls from the ladder downward and hits somebody's head and kills him. So on the one hand, there's an aspect of up, because you're going up the ladder. There's also an aspect of down, that you basically pushed down with your foot. You basically pushed down the rung, and the rung then went downward because of the pressure of your foot that was pressuring downward and fell on somebody's head and broke his head. So do we consider it upward, in which case he would be potter, or do we consider it downward, in which case he'd be chayiv to go into exile? So that's the shaila again. Rababo asks, Rabbi Yechanan, oya ole basulam, if he was going up a ladder, v'nishmata ashleva mitachtov, and the rung, because of his downward force of his step, the rung fell downwards, v'nafla v'harago, and fell down and kills Itamar. So now, what's the halacha? Ki agav no aliyahi or yuridahi? Do we consider it? So let's go back to our friends Geva and Itamar. So do we consider it like Geva was going up, in which case he's potter, or do we consider it like he was going down because he was pushing the rung downward, with the pressure of his body weight. So Rabbi Yochanan says, well, we would consider it to be an aliyah shitzarech yerida, right? You have to have downward pressure on the rung in order to go up to the next rung. So therefore it would be considered yerida shitzarech aliyah. We said earlier that yerida shitzarech aliyah is you would be exiled for Esvei, but then Rabbi Bo asks Akasha, Ze klal, that the Mishnah had said, this is the rule, Kol shebederech yiridaso gole, if it's downwards, so then you have to go into exile. Shelo bederech yiridaso, if it is not downwards, eino gole, you do not go into exile. Shelo bederech yiridaso lisuyimai, when we say that it is not downwards, what's included in not downwards? So lavli suye kagavna is not including this scenario, and he would be potter from exile. But then the Gemara responds, Kol shebederech yiridaso. Well, the ratio, right? The first part of the statement says Kol shebederech yiridaso, something that is downward. What is that coming to include? Well, the isuye mai, the isuye katzav. That is coming to include a butcher. Okay. So we'll say that just like downward, right, kol shebederech yiridaso is including a butcher. So also we'll say that anything that is not downward is also including to a butcher, because a butcher, he's chopping down and then picking up, and he's going up and down and up and down. So the Tanya katzav shoy mekatzev, that a butcher who is butchering, Tana chada lefonav chayiv la'acharav potter. One brisa says that before him, in front of him is chayiv, behind him is potter. V'tani idach la'acharav chayiv lefonav potter. Another brisa says fakeret, that behind him is chayiv and in front of him is potter. V'tani idach bein lefonav bein la'acharav chayiv. Another brisa says that whether in front of him, whether behind him, chayiv. V'tani idach bein lefonav bein la'acharav potter. Another brisa says whether in front of him, whether behind him is potter. So my oh my, there seems to be all sorts of combinations of being chayiv, being potter when it comes to a butcher. V'leikasha, and it's no problem. Kan birida shelefonov. Well, if he's like striking down and then picking up, so he'll be chayiv for the yerida and then potter for the aliyah. Kan baliyah shelefonov v'yerida shelacharev, and one is that when he's on his way up in front of him, but then he swings the knife behind him and it's downward. Okay, so then it'll be like potter in front and chayiv in down. Kan b'yerida shelefonov v'shelacharev, and then if he like hits down in front of him and then pulls it back behind his head, and now it's going downward behind him as well, so be chayiv in both of those. Also in front of him, after he strikes down, he then picks it up and then goes behind him and then goes to strike another blow, and now in Pekilu there's up in both directions. So if anything happens in those situations and somebody dies, gets his head split open, so he would be potter. He would be potter in those cases. It's aliyah. All right. Kitanoi. So let's say that taka, this kasha that Rab Abo asked Rab Yochanan, let's actually say it's taka machlokes tanoim. Let's say it's taka machlokes tanoim. This kasha of a person going up a ladder and then a rung falls down and lands on somebody's head and kills him. So let's say it's taka machlokes tanoim. Haya oila basulam, somebody's going up a ladder, v'nishmata shleva mitachtov, and a rung falls down. Tani chada chayiv, tani idach potter. One brisa says chayiv, another brisa says potter. There you go. It's machlokes Tanoim. My labak mifkid. Let's say this is machlokes. The ma'asav yerida, ma'asav aliyah. That one man number says it's considered yerida, and therefore it's chayiv galus, and one said it's considered aliyah, in which case it's potter from galus. Lo nit. No, everyone would say actually that it is considered going upward. V'leikasha is no kan lenizak and kan legalus. Oh. That it's considered going upward. And therefore, in terms of galus, he's potter from galus because it's going upward. But in terms of damages, he's of course going to be chayiv for damages, right? Adam muad la'olam, as we learned in Pave Kame, that a person is always chayiv for damages no matter what. Alternatively, or you could say alternatively, yes, he's going upward. And yes, we're talking about exile, therefore it should be potter. However, v'lokasha de isliya de lo isliya. Depends. If the rung was all wormy, and because it was wormy, it was shvach, it was weak. And therefore when it was weak, when you stepped on it, it actually bent downwards, and actually there was like a whole like downward vibe to it. And therefore you'd be chayev. But if it's not wormy, then you'd be potter. Everybody say, or you could say, no, we're not talking about a wormy rung. It just depends how if the rung was in their stark. If it was in their stark, so then you're potter. But if it was wobbly and moving around, then you'd be chayiv. All right, that was daf Zayin of Masechta Makos. We finished the first parak of Masechta Makos. We learned about the famous idea of a Sanhedrin that kills once every 7 years is considered particularly aggressive. We finished the first parak. We began the second parak that talks about cities of refuge, and we started talking about different scenarios where a person would be liable to flee to a city of refuge and cases where he would be potter. Peace out.